This is Edward October, host of OctoberPod on YouTube. Hear that jingle jingle? It could be Kris Kringle, or a home invader looking for an open window, a jilted lover looking for revenge, or a disgruntled coworker hoping to spike your eggnog with arsenic. The girls of our true crime podcast are always on Santa's nice list, but the crimes they discuss are very naughty indeed. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi, Jen.
Hey, Cam. How you doing?
Welcome to the lovely day 7.
777. Lucky 7. All right. Merry Christmas, everybody. It's getting close.
7th day. Close. We are on the downhill swing now, right? So since we're at 7, we go to 12.
12.
We are getting closer to the finale, I guess is what you're going to say.
We are in the final leg of the race, right?
Yes, we are.
And I hope everybody's got their shopping done, or at least really close to it.
I wrapped some presents last night, and it was just kind of fun. I liked it.
Well, good. Good.
I know, right?
It's pretty
good. It's pretty enjoyable
good
for me.
I am still waiting for a couple packages, and I'm a little nervous, but that's okay.
No,
right?
That just means they can get it after the holidays. Still good.
I can wrap up some IOUs.
Mm-hmm,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wrap up
Fingers
a bowl.
Crossed.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. All right, what you got?
Well, end day 7. Here we go. We're going down under. On Saturday, September 19th, 1992, Ken Seily and his companion, Keith Caldwell, were pursuing their shared passion for running. Both were members of a running club and regularly trained on various trails within the Belangalo State Forest. They spent a significant part of the day running through the forest, eventually reaching a location known as the Executioner's Drop due to its steep descent into a deep gorge. However, as they neared the spot, a foul odor began to fill the air. The closer they came to the area, the more intense the stench became. Upon reaching their destination, they noticed an unusual mound on the ground with what appeared to be strands of human hair protruding from it. Upon closer examination, they then observed part of a shoe sticking out from the mound. Could you imagine?
No. Mm-mm.
As the sun was It truly is. As the sun was about to set, they took note of the location on their map. Exiting the forest, they returned to their cars, where they meet up with their friends and shared the discovery that they had made. Ken promptly contacted the police, introducing himself and saying, "I've come across a body in the Belangalo Forest." There was some uncertainty about whether the police initially took his report seriously. However, law enforcement officers soon arrived at the scene and confirmed the presence of what they believed to be a body. Detectives also arrived shortly thereafter, requesting the dispatch of the crime scene unit. It's worth noting here that detectives from Sydney's King's Cross, as well as those from the Missing Persons Bureau, were already investigating the disappearances of several backpackers who were last seen heading south. At that moment, no one present at the scene realized the magnitude of what they had stumbled upon. The beginning of the largest murder investigation in Australia's history. The following day, police constables Roger Golf and Suzanne Roberts arrived at the location, discovering a second body merely 100 feet from the first. Beneath a pile of soil, they came across a section of a leg and a shoe. The media quickly descended upon the scene, speculating whether these bodies might belong to the 2 missing British backpackers, Joanne Walters and Caroline Clark, who had disappeared 5 months earlier. They had set out from King's Cross on a journey south together in search of employment. The entire world had its eyes fixated on Australia as the gruesome story continued to unfold. Families whose loved ones had vanished after visiting the country anxiously awaited any updates. Among them was Herbert Schmid from Munich, whose daughter Simone had gone missing near Sydney in 1991. Similarly, Manfred and Anke Neugebauer from Germany closely followed the developments, desperately hoping that the victims were not their son, Gabor, and his girlfriend, Anya, who had disappeared after leaving a backpackers hostel just after Christmas Day, 1991. Meanwhile, in Frankston, Victoria, Pat Everest prayed that the victims were not his daughter Deborah and her friend James Gibson, who had been missing since 1989. On September 20th, the police officially identified the bodies as those of Caroline Clark and Joanne Walters. The brutality of the crime became evident as it appeared that the perpetrator had been consumed by rage, ending their lives through multiple chest stabbings. Caroline had suffered further violence, enduring numerous shots to the head, in addition to being stabbed. Over the next several days, law enforcement tirelessly scoured the area for any potential clues, all the while hoping they would not stumble upon any more bodies. Upon concluding their search, the police confidently declared that no additional bodies had been discovered. Little did they know that this statement would return to haunt the authorities later on. Pathologist Dr. Peter Bradhurst undertook the challenging responsibility of performing the autopsies on the two women. Joanne had endured a staggering total of 14 stab wounds, while Caroline had suffered 10 gunshot wounds to the head and a single stab wound to her upper back. Police had gathered several pieces of evidence, but still had no idea who was responsible for these murders. Running out of ideas, Dr. Rod Milton, a forensic psychiatrist, was brought in on the case, who would build a profile of the killer. Based on the information he was provided, he came up with the following. The killer would be familiar with the area, and it was a planned attack. He stated that Caroline was killed execution style and that the murder was not sexually motivated. He added that the one stab wound was the killer showing that he was in control. Joanne's murder was more out of control and probably sexual due to the positioning of her clothing. Her underwear was missing. He stated that he believed that if there were two killers involved, one would be dominant and the other submissive, and the motive was simply pleasure. The doctor's assessment pointed to a profile of a killer, likely in his 30s, residing in the suburbs, employed in a blue-collar job, struggling with authority figures and relationships, and potentially identifying as gay or bisexual. However, as time passed, the case grew cold, and authorities found themselves in a frustrating position of waiting for new leads or developments or another murder. The team working on the investigation dwindled in size as the months passed. However, one man remained deeply troubled by the case, Bruce Pryor. Bruce had a strong connection to the Belangalo Forest, often spending time there, and being a resident, he had closely followed the case from the beginning. His concern for the missing young people weighed heavily on him, especially since he had a daughter of his own. One morning, driven by the desire to assist in any way he could, he ventured into the forest and explored the Maurice Fire Trail. Now, when he reached a point where the trail split, he chose the path that he had never taken. That sounds like Robert Frost. Let me word that differently. The path not taken. When he reached a point where the trail split, he chose the path he had not previously traveled. Parking his truck and getting out, he began to survey the area. During his examination, he stumbled upon a chilling discovery, a large bone. Although he initially tried to convince himself that it might be an animal bone, his further search was abruptly interrupted when he noticed something reflecting in the sunlight, a small human skull. I just can't imagine that. I can't imagine going out knowing that this killer's out there and then you're stumbling upon this stuff. Nope, I'd be staying at home watching Netflix. Nope. Officers were promptly dispatched to meet with Bruce, who led them to the location where he had made this unsettling discovery. Bruce then contacted detectives Peter Lovell and Stephen Murphy, who joined him at the scene. Upon arriving at the site, the officers began to investigate the area. In just a matter of minutes, their attention was drawn to a pair of shoes protruding from a pile of leaves. Reporters, of course, hurried to the scene, and as the news broke, speculation swirled around the grim discovery. Detectives continued their diligent work to secure evidence and piece together the puzzle. Near the first, smaller skeleton, they found a silver chain, a bracelet set, and a silver crucifix, leading them to presume it was the remains of a female. The second skeleton, larger in size, still had a pair of white sneakers attached to the feet. To confirm the identities, dental records were compared with the dental chart that had been provided to the police earlier. The confirmation came through. The first body was James Gibson, with the second body presumed to be Deborah Everest. Dr. Bradhurst initiated his examination to ascertain the cause of death. It was discovered that a stab wound had pierced the spine, leading to the belief that it had paralyzed the victim. Additionally, 2 more wounds had struck the breastbone. In total, 7 wounds had inflicted damage to the skeleton. Concerning the smaller bones, fractures were identified at the rear of the skull and in the spinal region. The skull bore 4 slash marks on the face, further revealing the extent of violence suffered by the victim. By the end of the day, it was confirmed that the second body was, in fact, Deborah Everest. The power and the strength that you have to damage the bones, I can't.
Or the hatred,
A task force, dubbed Task Force Air, was formed with Superintendent Clive Small taking the lead, while Detective Inspector Rod Lynch would be his second in command. The first order of business was to get through all the evidence that had been coming in, and for that, they needed a lot of detectives to work on this whole process. A hotline was set up to elicit the public's assistance. Dogs, who were specially trained to hit on the smell of decay, were brought in to search the forest floor. Since the gun that was used was identified as a Ruger repeating rifle, detectives started working on tracking down more information about the weapon, as well as how many people in Australia would have this kind of weapon. This proved to be nearly impossible. A man approached the detectives and revealed that his friend had been in the forest approximately a year earlier and had witnessed something highly suspicious during that time. The police reached out to the man's friend, who provided them with an astounding, precise description of 2 vehicles. He recounted seeing a Ford sedan and a 4-wheel drive vehicle driving down one of the trails leading into the forest, offering a crucial lead in the investigation. The man recounted that as the first vehicle passed him, he peered inside and saw a male driver with 2 other men in the back seat. Positioned between the 2 men was a female, her head covered with the cloth. In the second vehicle, there were 2 men, one behind the wheel and the other seated in the rear alongside another female who was also bound. He provided the police with intricate descriptions of all the occupants, including details about their clothing, physical features, and approximate ages. He mentioned that at the time, he had written down the license plate number of the second vehicle on a piece of cardboard, but had since lost it. To formalize his account, the police drafted an official statement and asked him to review it. After confirming the accuracy of the details, he signed the statement using the name Alex Milat. 26 days had passed since the couple's bodies had been found in the forest when a search team stumbled upon a pair of women's jeans with an empty 22-bullet packet on November 1st, 1993. It was not long before the team came to a bone, and just 10 feet away was a skull with a purple headband on it. A hiking boot with a large bone protruding from it was also located. Investigators thought they knew who this may be based on the headband, but the dental records would confirm their suspicions. It was Simone Schmidl, who had been last seen on January 20th, 1991. When Simone's body was discovered, she was still partially dressed with her shirt and her underclothing pushed up around her neck. There was no injury to the skull. The chest and back showed numerous stab wounds to the left and right sides, front and back, including the telltale knife thrust to the spinal area, which had severed the spinal column completely. Interestingly, the pink jeans found near her were not hers, but they did closely match a description of a pair worn by Anya Hopsheet. Anya, along with her boyfriend, Gabor Neugebauer, had been missing since December 1991. On November 4th, 1993, Anya, along with Gabor's bodies, had been found on a trail. Anya had been decapitated by a sharp instrument like a machete. Her skull would never be found. Gabor had been shot in the head 6 times. It was now clear that they were dealing with a serial killer. Investigators believed that with each kill, the perpetrator became more confident in spending more time with each person to conduct his sadistic fantasies. As if testing out different methods, he changed the way he killed the victims, with some being beaten, strangled, shot, stabbed, and/or decapitated. On January 25, 1990, Paul Onions set out in the searing Australian sun to hitchhike. A man approached Paul and asked him if he needed a ride. Paul was thrilled and accepted the offer. The man told Paul his name was Bill, and the two got, comfortable in the car. Ride's going smooth, everything's fine. But as the ride continued, Paul noticed that the friendly Bill started to change. He started ranting racist things, and then he refused to talk altogether. Paul started to feel weird. Bill pulled over to get something from the back of the truck. He had insisted that he needed to get something. And Paul saw his escape, and he got out, but Bill demanded he get back into the vehicle. Paul complied, and once again inside, Bill pulled out a gun on Paul and told him that he was going to rob him. Paul didn't believe it. Paul grabbed the door handle and jumped out. As Paul was running, he could hear Bill yelling to stop or he would shoot him. Paul managed to get inside a van, yelling for help from the madman. The frightened woman who picked him up would drive him to police. Paul shared his entire ordeal with Constable Janet Nicholson, recounting the entire traumatic event. It would be only later in life that he came to the chilling realization that the man who had attacked him was the same individual responsible for the brutal murders of the hikers. Paul had unwittingly survived an encounter with a serial killer. As the investigation continues, 2 phone calls would prove to be pivotal in uncovering valuable information. The first call came from Joanne, the woman who had picked up Paul Onions after he had been attacked, and she shared her story, providing crucial details that were recorded. Paul Onions himself made a call to the task force hotline number on November 13th, 1993. During the call, he recounted the details of the attack and was questioned about why he had not reported it earlier. Instead of a further follow-up, he was simply thanked for the information, and the call was abruptly ended. When he received no further communication in the weeks that followed, he began to believe that his report held no value, and he tried to put it out of his mind. The second phone call came from a concerned woman who'd reported that her boyfriend worked alongside a man she found peculiar and believed he should be investigated. She provided additional details, mentioning that this man owned property near the forest, drove a 4-wheel drive vehicle, and possessed a substantial number of firearms. The man in question was identified as Ivan Milat. On November 17, 1993, law enforcement officially stopped searching in the forest as no other bodies or evidence had been recovered. In January 1994, senior constables Gordon and McCluskey were given the job of following up on a file that contained 3 separate leads. The first lead was a folder with the name Milat on it, with papers inside it. Gordon delved into the criminal records and discovered that Ivan Milat had indeed been convicted of various offenses and had spent several years behind bars. However, none of these convictions pointed to him being a potential serial killer. What truly raised Gordon's suspicion was a discovery in the archives. In 1971, Ivan had picked up 2 girls who were hitchhiking from Liverpool to Melbourne, and he was accused of raping one of them. Both girls testified that he had been armed with a large knife and had a length of rope in his possession. Ivan was eventually acquitted when the prosecution case was dismissed due to lack of evidence. This unsettling incident added a significant layer of concern to the investigation. It's kind of all coming together for him. 4 detectives, including Gordon and McCluskey, were assigned to the Milat leads. A team was assigned to follow him and stake out his house. The team would learn that a silver Nissan Patrol 4-wheel drive had been previously owned by Ivan, but he had sold the car 2 months after Caroline Clark and Joanne Walters were discovered. That's not suspicious. Police go interviewed the new owner, and they learned that the new owner had found a bullet in the driver's seat. It was a .22. The .22 caliber was later analyzed and found to be consistent with the empty boxes found near Clark and Walters. The case was intensifying, and the investigators needed more evidence. And here it comes. On April 13th, Jordan came across that report that detailed Paul Onion's attack. They realized that if Paul could possibly identify Ivan as the man who had attacked him, It could potentially establish a connection between Ivan and the backpack killings. Toward the end of April, Paul Onions was approached by authorities and requested that he come in for an interview to talk about the day he had been attacked. They also told him that they considered him a witness in the backpack killings. Paul, of course, was deeply shocked by this revelation. I can't imagine. He's just living his best life there because he thought that there was no connection since he called it in. A week later, police escorted Paul Onions to the location of his attack and realized that the spot where he had jumped out of the vehicle was less than a mile from the forest entrance. The following day, Paul was presented with a video lineup of potential suspects, and he had positively identified Ivan Milat. With this crucial identification, the police had enough evidence to arrest him for the attack on Paul and secure search warrants for his residence. On May 22, 1994, law enforcement officers conducted a raid on Ivan Milat's house. The team took their positions at 6:36 a.m., and despite Ivan initially thinking it was a joke, he and his girlfriend eventually emerged from the house. How would you think that's a joke, especially if,
I don't know.
During the raid, the police discovered substantial evidence at his house and in the possessions of some of his family members. This is truly disturbing. They found a postcard addressed to Bill, bullets, sleeping bags that belonged to victims Simone and Deborah, photographs of Ivan with a handgun on his hip, and a picture of his girlfriend wearing a top identical to the one owned by Carolyn Clark. In the garage, they came across a headband that closely resembled the one Simone was known to wear, which was similar to the one that was found on her skull. Cooking equipment belonging to Simone, as well as a camera that belonged to Caroline Clark, were also recovered. The police found electrical tape, cable ties, and a bag of yellow and blue ropes. These items were similar to those discovered at the crime scenes. With this evidence, Ivan Milat was taken into custody and charged with the robbery and attempted murder of Paul Onions. However, the discovery of this evidence would lead to additional charges. Ivan Robert Marco Milat was ultimately charged with the murders of 7 backpackers. The trial was initially scheduled for June 1995, but faced delays due to a pay dispute involving the lawyers. During the trial, the defense team's primary strategy revolved around convincing the jury that Ivan was not responsible for the backpacker murders. Instead, they implied that his brothers, Richard and Walter, were the true killers, and that they had framed Ivan by planting the incriminating evidence at his house.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sure.
I guess that giving his girlfriend one of those shirts, too.
I know that's got to be one of the creepiest things.
True. And
Seriously, I couldn't imagine getting a gift from her boyfriend and then finding out it was one of his victims.
Despite the defense's efforts to create doubt, the prosecution presented a strong and solid case against Ivan Milat. On July 24th, the case was sent to the jury. Milat's family was confident that Ivan would be acquitted, which is odd since the defense was placing the blame on one or possibly 2 of his brothers, right? But they're thinking, he's going to be acquitted. On July 27th, the verdict was reached. Ivan Milat was found guilty on all counts. He responded, "I'm not guilty of it. That's all I have to say." For the Paul Onions attack, Ivan received 6 years. On each of the 7 counts of murder, Ivan received a life sentence. Ivan was transported to a maximum security prison in Maitland, southwest of Sydney, after his conviction. He was greeted into jail with a solid beatdown by a fellow inmate.
Oh, that's so sad.
Welcome. On July 17th, Ivan was involved in a failed escaped attempt and was then sent to Goulburn Jail, which I think is ironic considering its location. It is right by the Belangalo Forest.
Then he can fantasize about.
While in jail, Ivan was caught with the hacksaw hidden in a plate of biscuits and received solitary confinement for it. Ivan had stated that he will attempt to escape at every opportunity. In May of 2019, Ivan Milat was diagnosed with terminal esophageal cancer. On August 9th, 2019, Ivan was moved to a secure treatment unit located at the Prince of Wales Hospital, and on October 27th, he died from stomach and esophagus cancer at 4:07 a.m. He was 74 years old. Authorities assert that Ivan might have been implicated in additional assaults and homicides beyond the 7 for which he was convicted. Notably, these suspicions arise from the similarity in the MO in cases such as Karen Rowland, 20, who disappeared February 26, 1971, and was discovered in the Fairbrain Pine Plantation in May of 71. Peter Letcher, 18, who went missing in November 1987 and was found in the Belangalo State Forest in 1988. And Diane Pinocchio, 29, who disappeared on September 6, 1991, and was found in the Talaganda State Forest in November 91. These murder investigations remain open. Closing this all out, in an interview in 2011, Paul Onions did clarify that he received an award, which was $200,000 for his role in Ivan's conviction, but he opted not to claim the reward. Ivan Milat would die without ever confessing, always saying he was innocent. But it is believed he did, in fact, confess to his mother that he was, in fact, the backpack killer. And that's the story of Australia's heinous backpack killer.
I don't wish cancer on anyone, but if I did,
you
know what I mean?
A serial killer would...
It's hard to find sympathy for him. I mean, I'm sure it was very painful.
I'm sure all those people that died such a heinous death were painful too.
10 gunshots to the head, 6 gunshots to the head, 14 stabs. Yeah.
So they did, I think one of his brothers did come out and grant an interview. The other one would not. And I do find it weird that there was an eyewitness seeing them with females in the car. Like, if he really saw that, that's really disturbing. But I guess we may never know unless there's a deathbed confession. So that is day 7.
Day 7. Well, that was, I think that was kind of...
hiking is
one of the first big serial cases I followed kind of as an adult.
Oh, really?
Or not really followed it, but like...
You became aware of it, sort of.
Knew, yeah. You know what I mean? Like,
I did. And there's a
documentary on him.
Lot more on this, but for the sake
Christmas.
Of keeping it short, and with the Christmas episodes, we don't, just because we have to write 12 in 12 days or,
however
get them out there
get them all
and
recorded.
Then still do our regular episodes. We don't necessarily do the deeper dive that we like to do on our regular episodes.
Exactly.
This is just meant for your listening pleasure.
While you wrap presents, bake cookies, dread your in-laws coming, all that kind of stuff. Keep your mind off all of that. But anyway, good job.
Well,
we'll be back tomorrow.
To day 8. I know. So tomorrow. Until then, remember, lock your doors.
And keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya.
Today's episode was researched and written by me, Cam. For more information about this episode, as well as all the sources I used, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by hosts Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Vertesi from We Talk of Dreams. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October from October Pod VHS. Our True Crime Podcast is executive produced by Nico Vertesi and Dick Bain. Make sure to like and subscribe to Our True Crime Podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. We can be reached on Instagram and Facebook at Our True Crime Podcast or on Twitter at Our True Crime Pod. You can email us at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com. If you really like the show, make sure to check out our Patreon at Our True Crime Podcast. Our True Crime Podcast is an OTC production.